Chapter 1. The House I Thought Was Home. I never thought the word family would be used to push my children into a dark basement and call it sacrifice. I never imagined I would be painted as the villain for protecting them, or that silence would become the most dangerous thing I ever chose. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my own family turned against me, how a single legal notice changed everything, and how I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be final. If you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of family, stay with me, because this didn't end the way they expected. I came back to my parents' house in early October of 2024, believing it would be temporary and manageable. I told myself it was a practical decision, not an emotional one. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 47 years old, financially independent, and fully capable of supporting myself and my 2 children. I was not returning because I had failed. I was returning because I believed family still meant something steady and protective when everything else felt uncertain. The house sat in a quiet Connecticut suburb where trees arched over the road and neighbors waved without asking questions. It was the same house I had grown up in, the same white siding, the same narrow front steps that creaked in the exact same place. Familiarity has a way of lowering your guard. I thought that because I knew the house, I understood the rules inside it. My work came with me. I handled financial operations for mid-sized companies, all remote, all steady. I paid my own bills. I paid for my children's schooling, healthcare, and daily needs. I was not asking my parents for money or rescue. I was asking for time and space. My son Ethan was 15, tall for his age, already learning how to keep his feelings under control. My daughter Lily was 12, observant and quiet in a way that made adults underestimate how much she understood. From the moment we arrived, they acted like guests instead of family. Shoes lined up too carefully by the door, backpacks placed neatly against the wall. They waited for permission before opening the fridge. My parents never said anything outright. It was the small things that set the tone. The way my mother reminded the kids not to leave lights on, even though the house was large and the electricity bill insignificant. The way my father commented on noise levels when Mark was not home, but said nothing when Mark and his wife Julia hosted loud friends. Mark was my younger brother by 4 years. He was 43 and had always been the axis our family rotated around. His career in real estate was described as promising, even during the years it barely paid. His stress was discussed openly. His needs were anticipated before he voiced them. Julia fit into the family easily because she understood the hierarchy. She was polished, careful, always aware of who mattered most in the room. She spoke softly and smiled often, especially in front of my parents. When she talked about future plans, everyone leaned in. Dinner became a nightly reminder of where I stood. Conversations flowed around Mark's listings, Mark's challenges, Mark's next steps. When I mentioned work, the response was always the same. You are doing fine. You always figure it out. It sounded like approval, but functioned as a signal to move on. I'd heard those words my entire life. You are strong. You are capable. You do not need help. Over time, they had stopped feeling like compliments and started feeling like instructions. The moment that broke everything came on a Tuesday evening that felt no different from the others. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing plates, while the rest of the family sat in the living room. The television was off. Their voices carried clearly. They were talking about space. That was the word they kept using. Space. How the house felt crowded. How Mark and Julia needed more room to work from home. How the layout was not ideal anymore. Then my father suggested the basement. He said the kids could move down there. He said it was obvious. Children adapt quickly. They do not need much. My mother agreed and added that kids today were too sensitive anyway. Mark said it would only be for a while and that Ethan and Lily would barely notice. I froze, with my hands still under running water. The basement was not a bedroom. It was damp even in dry months. The windows were small and close to the ground. There was no proper exit. I knew local housing codes. They knew them too. I walked into the living room and asked what they were talking about. My father looked surprised, almost annoyed that I had interrupted. He said I was taking things too seriously. He said this was the family home and everyone had to compromise. Mark shrugged and said it was temporary. Julia avoided my eyes. I told them calmly that the basement was not suitable. I said my kids needed light and warmth and safety. I said this was non-negotiable. My father responded with a sentence that still echoes in my head. He said I was grown and capable and that this was the family house. He said I could handle it. Mark added that he and Julia needed stability. My mother reminded me of everything they had done for me growing up. I turned to my children. Ethan's shoulders were stiff. Lily stared at the carpet. Neither of them said a word, but their silence said everything. In that moment, something settled inside me with absolute clarity. If I accepted this quietly, I would be teaching my children that their comfort mattered less than someone else's convenience, that love required shrinking, that family loyalty meant knowing your place. I told them to pack their things. I said it evenly, not loudly, not dramatically. My parents thought I was bluffing. My mother asked where we would go. My father told me to calm down. Mark said I was overreacting. I repeated myself and went upstairs with Ethan and Lily. We packed overnight bags, clothes, chargers, toiletries, the basics. Ethan moved fast, focused. Lily folded each item carefully like she was afraid of doing something wrong. No one stopped us. No one apologized. No one asked the kids if they were okay. We left the house after midnight. The street was silent. I loaded the car and felt something unexpected lift from my chest. I was not sad in the way I thought I would be. I felt clear. As we drove away, Lily asked if she had caused trouble. I told her no. Ethan asked if we would come back. I told him I did not know. That night in a small hotel room, I lay awake listening to the hum of the heater. The conversation replayed in my head, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was never about the basement. It was about being convenient, about being the one who adjusted because she could, about being valued only when it cost nothing. Chapter 2. Silence they didn't expect. The morning after we left, I understood how quickly silence gets misinterpreted. By breakfast, my phone had already been rewritten into a story where I was irrational and temporary. I woke before the kids in the small extended stay room we had checked into late the night before. The curtains did not quite close all the way, and early light spilled across the carpet. For a moment, everything felt neutral. Then I reached for my phone. There were missed calls from my parents and several messages stacked on top of each other. My mother had written that we needed to talk calmly. My father had left a short message saying I was taking things too far. My brother Mark sent a text close to midnight saying everyone was tired and this would blow over if I stopped reacting emotionally. No one asked where we were. No one asked if the kids had slept. The assumption was clear. I would come back. I always did. That belief did not come from nowhere. It had been trained into them. When Ethan and Lily woke up, they moved differently than they had the day before. Ethan was quiet and focused, already mentally preparing for school. Lily watched me closely while she brushed her hair, like she was trying to understand the shape of what we had stepped into. We dropped them off, and I drove without music for several minutes before pulling into a small coffee shop. I did not open my laptop to work. I opened it to steady myself with facts. The house had been purchased in 2010. At the time, it was a shared decision, practical and cautious. In 2012, when refinancing became necessary, the deed had been placed solely in my name because my credit and income were stronger. My parents had thanked me and said it was just paperwork. By 2019, the mortgage was paid off. I remembered that day clearly. I had printed the confirmation and placed it in a fire-resistant box, along with the deed, tax records, and insurance documents. Not because I expected conflict, because organization had always been my way of staying safe. Over the years, language shifted. My father would say things like, "You are holding the house for us," or "This is still the family place." My brother repeated it often enough that it became accepted truth. Even I had stopped correcting it. That morning, I stopped agreeing. The phone rang while I sat there. It was my mother. I answered. She spoke quickly, telling me she had not slept, that my father was under stress, that this situation was affecting his health. She asked if that was what I wanted. I told her calmly that I was not discussing the house by phone. I said future communication would need to go through appropriate channels. She paused, clearly startled, then said I was being cold and dramatic. An hour later, Mark called. His tone was irritated, not concerned. He said this was unnecessary. He said the kids could handle the basement for a while. He said he just needed time. I asked him what he needed time for. He said work, finances, stability. I reminded him that I had managed all of those things without family intervention for years. He accused me of being unfair. That was when I realized they were not negotiating. They were waiting me out. I contacted an attorney that afternoon. Her name was Dana Keller, a property and family law specialist recommended by a colleague. I explained the situation. She listened carefully and asked practical questions. She confirmed what I already knew. I was the legal owner. Occupancy without a lease still required formal notice. 30 days was standard. She asked if I wanted to proceed. I said yes without hesitation. Dana drafted the notice that evening. It was brief and factual. It stated that the right to reside at the property would end in 30 days and that all communication should go through her office. There were no accusations, no explanations, no emotional language. The notice was sent by certified mail the next morning. That was the moment the panic began. My mother called crying, asking how I could involve lawyers against family. She said she never thought I would go this far. I told her calmly that family should not require children to live in unsafe conditions. Mark left a voicemail asking for a few more months, just until things stabilized. He said this would ruin him. Dana responded with the same calm language every time. 30 days, no extensions. At dinner that night, Ethan told me something quietly. He said Grandma had told Aunt Julia that I had abandoned them. He said it without anger, just observation. Lily asked why people lied when the truth was simpler. I told her sometimes the truth costs more than they want to pay. Over the next few days, messages slowed. The certainty drained out of them. The pressure shifted. Something else changed too. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I stopped rehearsing arguments. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who were not listening. Silence, paired with boundaries, felt solid. At the end of the week, Dana forwarded a message from my mother asking to meet in person. She said they just wanted to talk. I did not respond. There would be a conversation eventually, but it would not happen on their terms. For now, the line was drawn.
Chapter 3. When the story turns against you. It settled into clarity over the next few days, not the kind that brings comfort, but the kind that removes illusion. I was no longer guessing how my absence was being explained. I was beginning to hear it. The first hint came from a woman I barely knew, someone I recognized from the neighborhood but had never spoken to directly. I was picking up coffee near the school when she stopped beside me and said she was sorry to hear about my parents. She said it gently, like sympathy wrapped in curiosity. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said she had heard my mother was having a very hard time, that she had been abandoned, that she did not understand what she had done wrong. I thanked her for telling me and walked away without correcting a single word. That was the moment I decided I would not chase the narrative. I would let it stretch itself thin. 2 days later, Helen Carter called me. Helen had lived near my parents for more than 20 years. She noticed things most people ignored. Patterns, shifts in tone, the way stories changed depending on who was listening. She asked if I was safe. I told her we were. There was a pause, then she said she wanted to check something with me. She said there had been a conversation at the neighborhood association meeting that made her uncomfortable. I asked her to tell me. She said my mother had spoken during the open discussion. She said my mother described me as unstable, as someone who took the children and cut off contact without warning. She said my mother told everyone she was heartbroken and confused. Helen asked if any of that was true. I told her only what was necessary. I said the house was legally mine. I said my children had been asked to move into an unsafe space. I said I chose to leave instead. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said that explained a lot. The fundraiser happened the following weekend. It was the annual fall event for the Homeowners Association. I did not attend. I had no interest in standing in a room full of people performing grief. My mother did attend. According to Helen, she told the same story she had been telling everywhere else. She spoke of betrayal, about being punished for reasons she did not understand, about how families were supposed to support each other. People listened. People nodded. There is power in visible pain, especially when it is presented without context. Then, Helen raised her hand. She did not accuse. She did not interrupt. She said she was confused and wanted to understand something. She asked who had been paying the property taxes on the house for the past decade. The room went quiet. My mother tried to answer without answering. She said finances were complicated. She said families did not keep score. Helen nodded and asked whose name was on the deed. My mother smiled tightly and said paperwork did not define family. That was when someone else spoke up, a man who remembered when the roof had been replaced after a storm. He said he thought I had handled that. A woman mentioned that I had coordinated the insurance claim. Another neighbor said they assumed the house belonged to me because I was always the one managing things. The story did not fall apart dramatically. It weakened. It lost its confidence. By the end of the evening, people were no longer nodding. They were asking questions. I heard about all of this secondhand. I did not call anyone. I did not clarify publicly. I did not post anything online. I let the facts do what they do best when they are not smothered by explanation. Around the same time, Mark's situation began to unravel. He had been counting on a large real estate deal, one he had mentioned often during the last weeks we lived together. The commission would have solved several problems at once. It would have given him breathing room. The client followed Julia on social media. Julia had been posting emotionally since we left, long captions about betrayal, stories about being forced into instability, comments about having nowhere to go, nothing specific enough to be actionable, just enough to invite sympathy. Those posts did not match the version my parents were telling publicly. The client noticed. Mark called me one night after 10. I did not answer. He left a message. He said the deal had fallen apart. He said the client was concerned about drama. He said this was my fault. I listened once and deleted it. A few days later, Helen mentions that Julia had gone quiet online, that several posts had been removed, that she seemed worried now about how things looked instead of how they felt. That was when I understood something important. Karma rarely arrives with spectacle. It arrives through consequences that make sense. I still did not correct the narrative. When people asked me directly, I answered carefully. I said I was not comfortable discussing private family matters. I said my priority was my children's safety and stability. I said the rest was being handled appropriately. That was all. The more measured I was, the more strained their version became. At home, the kids noticed too. Ethan told me one evening that his grandmother asked his aunt why neighbors were acting distant. Lily said she overheard Julia complaining that people were asking questions she did not like. Neither of them sounded upset. They sounded observant. I realized then that I had spent years protecting them by absorbing conflict, by smoothing edges, by making myself smaller so no one else had to adjust. What I was doing now was different. I was letting reality take up space. I was not attacking. I was not defending. I was no longer translating their behavior into something easier for others to accept.
That was when the story stopped belonging to them. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. And I knew this was not the end of the shift. It was only the point where the balance began to change. Chapter 4. The Day They Asked to Come Back. It was enough until it wasn't. With 5 days left on the notice, the messages changed tone. The anger drained out of them and something softer took its place. Not understanding, not accountability, urgency disguised as regret. The first message came through my attorney's office on a Monday morning. It was brief and careful. My parents wanted to talk, not argue, not negotiate, just talk. They said they wanted to clear the air and find a way forward as a family. I read it twice and closed my laptop. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one suggested meeting somewhere neutral so no one would feel attacked. They said they understood why lawyers were involved now. They respected it. They just wanted one conversation. Judith called me that afternoon. She asked how I wanted to handle it. I told her I would agree to one meeting under one condition. It would be in her office. No coffee shops, no living rooms, no places heavy with memory or leverage. They accepted immediately. The speed of that acceptance told me everything I needed to know. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. Judith's office sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown. It was quiet, professional, intentionally neutral, the kind of space designed to keep emotions from echoing too loudly. I sat at the long conference table with my hands folded in front of me and noticed how steady they were. I had not rehearsed anything. I did not need to. They arrived together. My parents walked in first. My father looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slightly rounded. My mother held her purse tight against her chest like armor. Daniel followed a few steps behind them. His wife was not with him. We sat across from each other. Judith took the seat beside me and opened a thin folder, not for effect, just routine. My mother spoke first. She said she was sorry things had gone so far. She said she never intended to hurt me. She said families sometimes miscommunicate and mistakes happen. My father nodded along and added that perhaps they had underestimated how sensitive the situation was. He said emotions were high and no one meant for things to escalate. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stayed quiet. I listened without interrupting. Judith waited. My mother continued. She said they missed the children. She said the house felt empty without them. She said this situation had taken a toll on everyone involved. I asked her gently what she was asking for. She hesitated, then said she wanted to find a solution that did not involve anyone being pushed out. She said surely there was a way to move forward without tearing the family apart. That was when Daniel leaned forward. He said this did not have to be permanent. He said things were unstable right now. He said everyone just needed time. Then he said it. He said if I could withdraw the notice and let them stay another 6 months, everything would calm down. He said 6 months was nothing. He said after that they could reassess. The room went quiet. Judith closed the folder and looked directly at him. She said the notice was valid and already in effect. She said it would not be withdrawn. Daniel's face flushed. He said he thought this meeting was about talking things through. Judith responded evenly. She said this meeting was about clarity. My mother's voice trembled then. She said my father's health had been affected by the stress. She said his blood pressure had spiked. She asked if I really wanted that on my conscience. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. I scrolled through old messages and turned the screen toward her. There were texts from years earlier, different moments, different conflicts, each one referencing stress, health, how my decisions affected them physically, each one followed by a request for me to adjust. I said quietly that this was not new. My mother looked down. Daniel exhaled sharply and said I was holding on to the past. I told him I was holding on to the present. Judith spoke again. She reminded them that the timeline stood. She reiterated the legal process. She said my position was firm and that further requests would not change that. Then she looked at me. I told them what I was willing to do. I said I would help identify suitable rental options nearby. I said I would contribute a one-time amount toward moving costs to ease the transition. I said I would not extend the notice. I said there would be no further negotiation. My father finally spoke. He asked why I was doing this. I told him because my children were asked to accept less safety and less respect so others could be more comfortable. I told him that line had been crossed, and I was not stepping back over it. No one argued. Daniel stared at the table. For the first time since we sat down, he looked unsure of his footing. My mother asked if this meant things were over. I told her it meant things were changing. The meeting ended without raised voices, without apologies that mattered, without reconciliation. They left together. Judith walked me to the door and asked if I was okay. I told her I was. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the feeling settle. It was not victory, it was not relief, it was finality. For years, the rules in my family were unspoken and enforced quietly through expectation. That day, they were named out loud, and once named, they could no longer control me. I got into my car knowing something fundamental had shifted, not because I had taken anything from them, but because I had stopped surrendering ground that was never theirs to begin with. Chapter 5. What I took back wasn't the house. What came after felt quieter than I expected. Not empty and not sad, just steady in a way my life had never managed to be before. The notice period ended without spectacle. There were no dramatic phone calls, no last-minute apologies, no sudden realizations delivered at the door. They moved out on the final day, quietly and efficiently, like people who had run out of arguments and decided not to invent new ones. I was not there when it happened. I did not want to be. Judith called me that afternoon and told me the house was vacant. She said the keys had been left on the kitchen counter exactly as instructed. Her voice was professional, neutral, almost kind. I asked her to proceed with the sale. The house went on the market a few weeks later. It sold quickly, not because of nostalgia or family history, but because it was solid and well kept. I signed the documents in Judith's office on a gray Tuesday morning. My hands did not shake. I did not hesitate. I felt no rush of emotion, only completion. I did not feel like I was selling my childhood. I felt like I was closing a door that had been held open far longer than it needed to be. With the proceeds, I bought a smaller home a few towns away. Nothing impressive, nothing symbolic, just enough space for the three of us. Enough light, enough quiet. A place that did not come with expectations attached. The first night there, Ethan dropped his bag in the larger bedroom without asking. Lily chose the room with the window that faced the yard. I watched them settle in, unpacking without the careful hesitation they used to carry. They moved like they belonged. Life simplified almost immediately. Mornings became predictable again. School runs without tension, work calls without interruption, dinners without someone waiting for the wrong moment to speak. The air felt lighter because it was no longer filled with things unsaid. Distance did what years of proximity never had. I heard about my family only through fragments, never directly. Daniel and his wife moved into a small apartment nearby. Temporary, he told people, just until things improved. His voice carried less certainty now. Lauren lost a brand partnership she had been cultivating for months. The company cited concerns about image consistency. She stopped posting online after that. Silence replaced performance. My parents downsized into a rental. My mother mentioned to someone we both knew that she had not realized how much I handled until I stopped doing it. It was not an apology. It was acknowledgement. I did not reach out. When we crossed paths in public, it was brief and polite. At a grocery store one afternoon, my mother asked how the kids were doing. I said they were well. My father nodded and said that was good. No one tried to say more. That space between us felt honest. At home, the kids changed in ways that mattered. Ethan spoke more freely. He challenged things that did not feel fair. Lily grew quieter but more confident, less focused on pleasing everyone around her. They no longer asked if they were causing trouble just by existing. One evening, while we were washing dishes together, Lily asked me how she knew when to stop trying. I told her it was not about giving up on people. It was about giving up on being hurt by the same behavior over and over again. I told her love without boundaries teaches people that they can take more than they should. She nodded slowly, like she was storing the thought somewhere important. That was when it finally became clear to me what I had taken back. It wasn't the house. It was authority over my own life. For years, I had confused endurance with strength. I believed that being the one who held everything together meant I was doing the right thing. What I learned instead was that holding everything together often meant holding myself in place so others would not have to change. I did not feel triumphant. I felt aligned, aligned with my values, aligned with my children, aligned with a version of myself that no longer needed permission to protect what mattered. There were moments when I missed the idea of my family, the version I had hoped they would become if I stayed patient enough. Those moments came quietly and left the same way. What stayed was peace. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles in when you stop negotiating with people who benefit from your silence. Months later, on a calm Sunday afternoon, I sat on the back steps of our new place watching the kids kick a ball across the yard. The air was cool, the sky clear, everything felt grounded. I thought about how easily this story could have ended differently, how tempting it would have been to soften my stance to keep everyone comfortable, how familiar that pattern had been. I was glad I did not, because revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to humiliate anyone. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself quietly and letting reality do the rest. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the one expected to adjust while everyone else stayed comfortable, I hope you hear this. You are allowed to stop holding everything together. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about boundaries, clarity, and reclaiming your voice without losing your dignity, stay here. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is decide that enough truly is enough.